Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good morning to everyone. I hope all of you are doing good. I welcome you all to today's session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis. I hope all of you are doing good and thank you so much once again for joining in right on time at 10 a.m. Thank you so much for being punctual. This is one of those qualities which will take you a long way in your UPSC preparation as well. As you know, every single day, sharp at 10 a.m. we bring this live session to you. The objective is to make sure that we analyze all those news from the Hindu newspaper which are important from the examination point of view. Right after this analysis ends, we also have a quiz based on the topics that we have discussed here. That quiz is an objective type quiz that takes place on our Telegram channel. I hope all of you are members of that channel. If no, please make sure that you join that channel by using the link given in the description of the video. Now, let's begin. Without waiting any further, let's see what are the articles that we have for you today. The first article is from Sri Lanka. Why from Sri Lanka? The reason being that 4th of Feb, that is today, is actually Sri Lanka's Independence Day. So Sri Lanka celebrates Independence Day on the 4th of Feb. In fact, it is even more special this year because 4th of Feb 1948 is when Sri Lanka got independence. So if you calculate, that means today is actually the 75th Independence Day of Sri Lanka. Now, why are we so concerned about that? How does it matter to us if a neighbor of us is celebrating their Independence Day? The question mostly is on celebration. The author here, who lives in Sri Lanka, who is actually a well-known professor in Sri Lanka, he has written this argument in the Hindu newspaper that there is no reason for celebration in Sri Lanka right now. He says that if you look at the problems that Sri Lanka is going through right now, they don't have money even for the most basic things. And in that atmosphere, when the government is going ahead spending so much money to celebrate the 75th Independence Day, it does not make any sense. The author here is saying that as per the plans of the Sri Lankan government, they plan to spend 300 million rupees, that is in their currency 30 crore rupees, to celebrate their 75th Independence Day anniversary. Now there are two ways of looking at it. One way, yes, for any country around the world that got independence, it is a pride movement. It is a movement that you want to celebrate, especially when you are completing 75 years. However, for Sri Lanka, who doesn't even have money for the most basic things, does it make sense? The author here says that local elections in Sri Lanka, so for example, we have local elections in India, we have the municipalities, we have the panchayats. Similarly, in Sri Lanka also there are local elections. So, the local elections in Sri Lanka are actually due, that should be held in February. And there's a big debate going on around the entire country of Sri Lanka. Should we even have local elections? Why? Because we don't have money to conduct elections. In fact, the president of Sri Lanka has urged all the political parties to jointly accept that we should not have local elections right now because we just don't have money. Although the Election Commission of Sri Lanka have announced a schedule, but there are still question marks, would the local elections be held or not? The president of Sri Lanka is saying we don't have the money, we should not do that. The opposition parties on the other hand are saying that this is an excuse from the president. If the government can have money to celebrate Independence Day, why can't they have money to just have elections as their democracy demands? So all in all, Sri Lanka still is in a big crisis. The part of the problem that we are not realizing is, usually in India, or not just India, around the world, we have a tendency that once a big news starts, we follow that news for some weeks. And then even if the news continues, you usually don't follow it up. Ask this yourself. And in fact, I got a question in one of the classes I was taking a few days back, where one student asked me, "Sir, is the Ukraine-Russia war still going on?" I don't know. Do you think it's still going on? It is going on. It has not stopped. There is no end of the war. Just that we are almost fed up of it and we have stopped following that news. That is a tendency of people. Similarly, when you see the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, when you see the economic crisis in Pakistan, in all these countries, there is still economic issues that are going on. Just that you don't see it covered that often in the newspaper. So the economic crisis in Sri Lanka also still continuing, just that we might not be following it now. The author here says, if you look at the history of Sri Lanka has had a very mixed kind of a history. I have given this example earlier as well, and I want to repeat this example once again. We usually underestimate the fact how stable our country is, how stable our democracy is. For example, look at all our neighborhood. Look at the neighboring countries one by one. Look at Pakistan, look at Sri Lanka, look at Bangladesh, look at Nepal, look at Myanmar. All these countries, despite being democracies, have had problems. For example, they have had to make their constitutions multiple times. Sri Lanka also has had to make their constitution multiple times. In entire South Asia region, it is India, the only country which is stable and its democracy is going fine. If you look at the history of Sri Lanka also is a diverse country with a lot of people having different demands. For example, the majority population in Sri Lanka is the Sinhalese. Sinhalese mostly are Buddhist religions. Most of the Sri Lankan population, when they got independent, were the Sinhalese population, most of them Buddhist. Many of them demanded that in the Sri Lankan constitution, since the Sinhalese are in the majority, they should be given certain special preferences. They should be given, for example, more seats should be reserved for them in the government jobs. More seats should be reserved for them in government colleges. They should be the one who should have been taking most of the advantage of the government. On the other hand, you also know that Sri Lanka also had a minority Tamil population. The history should be very clear to all of you. British ruled over India and they ruled over Sri Lanka as well. British were the ones who started the cultivation of tea in Sri Lanka. For that cultivation, what happened was British actually took a lot of Indians, mainly from the Madras presidency that time, to Sri Lanka to work in plantations. Those people then settled in Sri Lanka and they became the minority Tamil population of Sri Lanka. For a long time, they have been discriminated against. In fact, there was a time when the government of Sri Lanka ordered their military to ensure that Tamil minority population does not get its rights. There was a civil war in Sri Lanka where the Tamil population, the minority population, had to fight against the Sri Lankan military. There was a lot of bloodbath. So there has always been this issue of Tamil versus Sinhalese, and the sad part is, even today it has not been resolved. In terms of Sri Lanka, you might have heard about 13th Amendment. Many people talk about 13th Amendment, the need to implement 13th Amendment. Now, what exactly is this? 13th Amendment was a constitutional amendment introduced in the Sri Lankan constitution, which said that the Tamil minority population should also be given equal rights to jobs, equal rights to admission, etc. However, that has still not been completely implemented. Time and time again in the international community, including India as well, we say that Sri Lanka should amend or should implement the 13th Amendment properly. The 13th Amendment basically meant that at the local level, in areas where the Tamil population has majority, they should be given their own rights. The Tamil population should not be discriminated against. All these things were a part of the 13th Amendment, but that has not been properly implemented, meaning that even today, the Tamil population that is minority in Sri Lanka, that still is facing discrimination. The good part about Sri Lanka was, if you look at the South Asian nations, when I say South Asia, I usually mean to say the SAARC nations. In South Asia mainly, Sri Lanka used to be the country with the best social and economic indicators. They used to have the best per capita income, the best health indicators, the best social indicators, etc. However, if we see right now, because of their economic crisis, the situation has become very, very bad. As per the article, Sri Lanka is now amongst top 10 countries in the world with the highest number of malnourished children. All of that is because of the economic crisis that is happening in Sri Lanka. Some of that is because of some factors that they could not control. For example, tourism almost ended because of the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, the terror attacks, the Easter terror attacks as they are famously called in Sri Lanka. Because of that, the tourist inflow declined. On the other hand, some of these were because of the decision that the Sri Lankan government took, forcing the country to become 100% organic, so on and so forth. Now, the article says, in short, there is no reason for the government of Sri Lanka to spend so much money on their Independence Day celebrations because the country is going through a very, very tough time. Now, at the same time, you have heard something like every crisis presents an opportunity. Whenever there is a crisis, whenever there is a bad situation, there will always be an opportunity from that situation. In this case, a crisis in Sri Lanka has multiple impacts on India as well. Some positive impacts and some negative impacts as well. What exactly are those? First, let's talk about the economic impact. See, obviously, because they are going through an economic crisis, when a country is in such a bad situation, they would not be able to buy or sell a lot of stuff. So, their trade with India has declined considerably. In fact, automobile companies of India like Tata Motors, TVS, used to sell a lot of vehicles to Sri Lanka. That has also stopped because people in Sri Lanka are not able to buy that. Second impact, refugees. Whenever you have a country going through economic or political crisis, a lot of people from that country try to run away from the country to have a better life. They usually go towards some of the neighbors where they think that they would feel much safer. In case of Sri Lanka also, especially the Tamil minority population, a lot of them have come to India as a refugee. That has also put an added pressure on the Indian states. Now, there are some positive points as well. Sri Lanka is world famous for production of its tea. Because the government of Sri Lanka forced the farmers to convert into 100% organic overnight, their tea market declined considerably. Sri Lanka was not able to supply tea around the world where it usually sells teas in large quantities. That presented a chance to India to now go ahead and fill that gap. So India is trying to fill that gap in the international market by supplying tea to Iran, Turkey, Iraq, etc. That has been a good point for India. Then, even in the apparel market, a lot of Asian countries, be it Bangladesh, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, all of these have become hubs of apparel market. Very well-known brands from around the world, for example, H&M, etc., that you actually are very familiar with, Zara. Many of them have their clothes made in South Asian countries, be it Bangladesh, Vietnam, Sri Lanka. Because Sri Lanka's market was not responding to this demand, their infrastructure was down, that also gave India the opportunity to give a push to our textile industry in place of Sri Lanka. So yes, there is a problem because of which India is also hurting, but at the same time, India is also taking a few advantages of the present situation that we see in Sri Lanka. Before we go ahead, let me take a few questions very quickly. Jyoti, I already explained why there is economic crisis in Sri Lanka. The tourism is is a very steep decline because of the terror attacks that we had because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sri Lanka mostly earns its money from foreign tourists coming into Sri Lanka. That is not happening. And secondly, because of their own government's decisions. They announced that announced that we are going to become a 100% organic country. All of a sudden, they banned the fertilizers. That destroyed their farming, the economic decisions were not taken well, there is also a loan from China, etc. Then I'll take one more question, 13th Amendment. So 13th Amendment is a constitutional amendment in Sri Lankan constitution. In simple terms, that is an amendment to give more rights to the Tamil minority population. Earlier, they were not given their rights. That is why. No, Rahul. LTTE is a history in Sri Lanka now. They don't have any role to play in the current economic crisis of Sri Lanka. Okay. Then I'll take one more question. I have a question. How refugees affect Sri Lanka? So refugees don't affect Sri Lanka. The point of refugees was it affects India. Whenever we have a country where there is a lot of economic crisis or people are not happy, they would run and they would try to save their lives. So a lot of refugees from Sri Lanka are coming into India. So that is why there is an impact on India and not on Sri Lanka. Perfect. So let's move ahead and let's see what are the next topics that you want to study. The next topic that we have is again from the page number 6 of the Hindu newspaper. That is on the question of charge sheet. Now, what exactly is a charge sheet? What is it that is in the news? Let's try and understand. I'm sure all of you would have heard the name charge sheet sometime or the other. Now, what is a charge sheet? Let's say there is a case against you, okay? Let's see someone files a case against you to the police that you committed a crime, you committed a murder or something like that. Now, what the police has to do is, police or CBI, whoever is the investigative agency, they would have to investigate the case and they would present their report to the court. In the court, they will say that these are the investigations that we did. In these investigations, this is what we found out. And then the court will then take decision based on that investigation. That investigation report that we have, this is called the charge sheet. So charge sheet is nothing but the investigation report that is filed by the investigative agencies. It can be filed by police, CBI, etc. That is what the charge sheet is. Now, what is it that is in the news? So recently what happened was, there was a question asked in the Supreme Court that charge sheets in some cases should be made available to the public. In simple terms, let's say if I am someone who is not related to the case, I should also be able to see charge sheet of some other case so that I could also see what are the investigations that are going on, what are the charges, what are the evidences, etc. That was a demand that was made, but the Supreme Court denied that. The Supreme Court said no, charge sheet cannot be made public. That is what the topic of the article is. The Supreme Court denied, saying that charge sheet cannot be made public. Why? The Supreme Court said that charge sheet would interfere with the ongoing judicial process. Now, the good part is in the past few years, we have seen increasing transparency in the judiciary. For example, all of you would know, now you can see the Supreme Court proceedings live as well. There is a Supreme Court website where you can see live the ongoing court proceedings of the Supreme Court. However, the charge sheet is still not public. There is one other thing that Supreme Court did very recently and which is very, very, very good. In Indian polity, all of you would have read that the official language of the Supreme Court is English. As you know, the official language of Supreme Court is English. In fact, Supreme Court is so strict on this rule that there have been many cases in the past that have been rejected by the court just because it was not submitted to the court in English. The Supreme Court has even rejected that. In fact, there are very, very famous cases where people have written letters to the Supreme Court requesting the Supreme Court to allow them to have case in some other language, but the court has not allowed it, saying that it will be a violation of the Constitution. So Supreme Court is very strict on the English language rule. However, there is a very good change that has happened. Recently, the Chief Justice of India announced that not the cases, but at least the judgment of the court will now be translated in 4 languages. The Supreme Court judgments will now be translated into 4 languages. What are these 4? Hindi, Gujarati, Odia, and Tamil. The Chief Justice of India understood and accepted the fact that legal language, especially when you write legal terms, many people will not understand. The entire intention of the judgment is that the people should understand. So Chief Justice of India said, from now onwards, Supreme Court judgments apart from English will be translated into these 4 languages as well. So these are certain good things. The live proceedings have happened, more languages have been introduced. But as per the author, why is it that the Supreme Court is not allowing charge sheet to be made public? That should also be done in the correct manner. Not just this, You cannot even file an RTI to get a charge sheet, because the Supreme Court has said that is not a public document. As per the Supreme Court, that's a private document and it will interfere with the ongoing proceedings. Now, there are very interesting factors that you have to understand here. Earlier, there was a case in 2016. There was a case in 2016 which was called Youth Bar Association versus the Union of India case, in which the Supreme Court had said that FIR in any case should be within 24 hours on the websites of the agency. Let me repeat, in 2016, the Supreme Court had said that whenever an FIR is registered by any agency, police, CBI, whatever, it should be in its website within 24 hours. Although the interesting part is they never said anything about the charge sheet. But at least for FIR, they did say that. The author is saying that the times have changed. Why? Let me tell you the author's argument. An author also is a very established person. He is not someone who's just writing randomly. The author here is saying, earlier there were times that we did not allow the public to criticize the police. Earlier, public was not even allowed to criticize the judiciary. But now times have changed. Now police, judiciary, all of them are open to certain criticism. Many people criticize the judiciary by putting out perfect facts. In that aspect, if we actually have to go ahead and make the judiciary more transparent, we should ensure that things such as a charge sheet should also be made public. Now over here, I see a lot of questions in the chat already asking me, sir, the difference between FIR and charge sheet. FIR and charge sheet are two very different things. Two very different things. Let's try and understand this. Charge sheet, as I said, is the end document after the investigation is over. See, what happened? Let's say a crime has been committed. You go to the police station. Police station writes the FIR. FIR is the first document. That is the first document that is written. FIR is first information report. Charge sheet is the last document to be written. So charge sheet is where all the investigation has already been done. In short, if a FIR is filed, that doesn't mean you have committed a crime. Filing an FIR against you doesn't mean that you are actually guilty. But when a charge sheet has been filed, when a charge sheet actually has been filed, then the police will then take a stand whether in the eyes of the police you are guilty or not. So charge sheet is only filed after the investigation is done. Not just this, there is also a time period to file the charge sheet. For example, the law says that charge sheet has to be filed at the end of the investigation. And if the charge sheet is not filed usually within 60 to 90 days, then you will get a bail. So when your arrest has been made within 2 to 3 months, the charge sheet has to be filed after investigation is done, after which you shall be released if the charge sheet is not filed. Charge sheet should have details of all the people involved, witnesses, evidences, every single thing has to be mentioned in the charge sheet for it to be complete. Charge sheet is the most important document that the court then looks into to decide on the punishment. Now, there are many people who have different views. Some people say, why should we have a charge sheet in the public domain, right? If I am not related to a case, why should I be able to see what is the investigation going on, right? Many people would say that. On the other hand, some other people say, filing a charge sheet and making it public is better. Why? So that everyone can see it and the police will be on their toes. The police will know that they have to be accountable. Police cannot just say, oh, no one is looking at it, let me write anything. That should not be the case. The police also should know that there is someone who is looking into them, and that is why making charge sheet public would actually ensure there is more accountability on the police and more accountability even on the judiciary as well. So there are two sides of this story. One side that the Supreme Court is saying it will hamper the investigation, it will be an interference. On the other hand, people who want more transparency are saying this will not happen. On the other hand, it will keep the police and the court much more in check. The question on charge sheet, however, has to be decided by the Supreme Court only. So far, it is not public. Let's see if it becomes public after that or not. Okay, I'll take just one or two questions here. Golu has a good question. After charge sheet will be made public, can't someone manipulate the witness? Charge sheet is after the investigation has been done, first. Secondly, those who want to manipulate the witness or those who want to influence the witness can do anyway. I don't think they will have to wait for the charge sheet. So charge sheet is available anyways to them who are connected to the case. For example, if I am the one against whom FIR is filed, my lawyer will obviously get to see the charge sheet. The question is, should the public be able to see it or not? If I am able to see someone's charge sheet, how would it concern me? Why would I go and change the witnesses? Doesn't concern me, right? Okay, I'll take one more question. Many people have this question. Does it not violate the right to privacy? So there are two things to consider here. Charge sheet does not have someone's personal information. Charge sheet is the investigative report by the police. That this happened, and these are the sequence of events that we have established. Anyways, when you say right to privacy, the point here is, on the basis of the charge sheet, the case will be contested in the court. Public anyways can see what is happening in the court. If a case goes to the court, obviously that becomes a public record. So when you say this against right to privacy, when you go to the court, you can assume that in that case, your right to privacy is anyways gone. For example, let's say the Nirbhaya case accused, can they say in the court, sir, my right to privacy is violated, I don't want my case to be published in the newspaper? Can they say that? No. So when the charge sheet is going to the court, the case will be heard on that matter. Automatically, people will get to know about it. These are the points on both sides of the argument. As I said, you can take whichever side that you want. The next article that we have, and as I told you earlier as well, I think we discussed this yesterday as well. When the budget is usually released, it is usually presented by the finance minister. The next few days will be spent in analyzing the budget by different newspaper articles. Today also there is one other dimension of the budget on which an article has been written in the opinion page. That is about going green. As you would have noticed in the budget, I'm sure, and if you saw the budget analysis also, you would have seen, the budget that was presented by the government was called the Amrit Kal budget. It was divided mainly into 7 themes. There were 7 themes of the budget. One of the themes in the budget was green growth. Green growth was one of the 7 themes, meaning that the government of India has focused a lot on pushing the country towards the usage of green energy. The author here is saying that this is a good way because what India does right now would have an impact on the entire world. See, the population that India has, the number of people that India impacts, 1 in 6 people around the world is an Indian. Around the world, if there are 6 Indians, 6 people, one of them will be an Indian. So India, whatever policy changes we introduce, if we go towards green energy, if we make a new discovery, it will have an impact not just on India, but on entire world. In that sense, it is actually a very, very good step that the government of India has focused on green energy in this budget. The article gives a lot of examples. The article says, for example, the budget has given a lot of space to green industrial and economic transition. The government has focused a lot on EV batteries and has said that we will be helping the private sector with viability gap funding. Now understand something. See, when you have any new technology, be it the solar cells, be it the lithium ion batteries which are required for the EVs, electric vehicles, etc. When you talk about all these things, understand they all require huge amount of money as an investment. To set up a plant to generate or to manufacture EV batteries, the lithium ion batteries, is not easy. That is very, very, very expensive. Not just this. When you talk about setting up, let's say, solar panels, all of these are very expensive. Not every company in the private sector can afford it. Either they have to take a huge loan from the bank, but there's a risk attached to it, or the other way around is the government has to support them. That is why the government has announced viability gap funding to support a lot of battery energy storage systems as well. India, as you know, has already announced the goal of reaching net zero by 2070. And for that to be achieved, we have to ensure that we give a major push to our green energy initiatives. For example, one very interesting initiative that has been announced is, finally, a government has realized the significance of Ladakh. For a lot of years now, we usually only saw that Ladakh is a great tourist destination. However, now we have realized that Ladakh has a lot of potential of generating energy as well. Because of high altitude, you know that in Ladakh, high altitude places, it is very easy to get a sunburn because you are much closer to the sun when you are at high altitude places. So for example, when you make use of these high altitude places, you can actually generate solar energy in much larger quantity at high altitude places. There is a very interesting thing that you have to understand about Ladakh. See, there are many high altitude places. You can talk about great mountains, Himalayas, etc. But understand this, high altitude places usually have an incline, like mountains are like this. So when mountains are like this, how will you set up solar panels? To set up solar panels, you require a plain land, right? You require land that is plain so that solar cells can be set up in a large area. This is an opportunity that Ladakh provides. Usually when you see high altitude areas, they don't have plain areas, but Ladakh has this great opportunity. It is a very high altitude area, it is also plain, so a lot of solar panels can be set up. And that is what the government is now aiming for, and the government has announced the support for that in the budget as well. There is one other thing that we have to understand. For any kind of energy, be it solar energy, be it green hydrogen, anything, generating energy is one thing, but that is not the end of the story. You have to also transport it. If you generate a lot of solar energy in Ladakh, how does it make sure that everyone in India can get that? You can't just ask everyone, go to Ladakh, take a box, bring solar energy at your home. That is not how it works. So how will you transmit that energy? That is also a big investment. This is where the government of India has been putting a lot of money into transmission lines. Interstate transmission system, meaning that you also have to be able to actually transmit that energy. And I'll tell you a very interesting fact. Many people don't know this, or people ignore this. India is actually a country that produces a lot more electricity than what we consume. Do you know that? If you actually see how many or how much electricity that we consume, if you add that up, the total demand in the country, and you see the total production of the country in terms of electricity, our production is higher than our demand. You know that? So the question is, then why do we have power cuts still in many tier 3, tier 4 cities or in villages? Why do we still have power cuts? The problem is with the transmission. When you transmit it and you don't have good infrastructure, there are a lot of power loss in between. So for example, you transmit 100% electricity from here through wire. By the time it reaches your home, it becomes 60%. Remaining 40% actually is lost in between. There are so many energy losses that happen. Why? Because the infrastructure for transmission is not up to the mark. If you correct that, you can gain much more energy efficiency. So that is a problem that we are facing. We don't have lack of energy, we have the problem of infrastructure that is actually not good enough for transmitting energy without losses. That is what the government is focusing on. Apart from that, as you know, there are a lot of initiatives taken from the government of India to give a push towards green energy. Some of them are announced in the budget, some of them have been going earlier on as well. The Green Credit Program, for example, was in the budget. I don't know how many of you read this or not. Green Credit Program is a very interesting program. Under this program, for example, any community or individual, if they have a free land of their own, they can grow forest in those lands. After 3 years, they can sell that forest to the forest department. The forest department will compensate them for this. This is called green credit program. So it allows the people to participate in sustainable development. People can go ahead and they can actually set a forest and they can hope that the forest department will acquire it. We have been talking a lot about green hydrogen mission. This was announced even before the budget. The government has also expanded the Govardhan scheme, under which the government wants to give any alternate source of income for farmers. Not just agriculture, the farmers are expected to earn even more money by using the waste that the animals produce. We have also been focusing on vehicle scrappage policy. Government wants the people to scrap their old vehicles. When they buy a new one, they will be given some rebate. All of these things are examples of how the government of India wants to push the entire country towards green initiative. And as I told you earlier as well, whatever happens in India has an impact around the world. This is not just because I am an Indian and I love my country. That is fine. But the scale of population you have to understand. 1 in every 6 people around the world is an Indian. So obviously what happens in India would have an impact on at least 1/6 of the world. Just imagine that. At least 1/6 of the world can be impacted by India. So see how much impact can we have in the long run. This is why it is extremely important. However, having said that, it is not that easy that we say tomorrow we are going green and we will go green automatically. There are a lot of challenges involved in going green. First big challenge, it is expensive in the long run. It is expensive. When you read about green hydrogen manufacturing is not that difficult, but reducing the cost is very, very difficult. Solar energy was extremely expensive earlier, now it has reduced. It is easy to say transmission lines have to be changed, but do you know how much money it will cost us to change transmission lines of all the country? All of that is very, very expensive exercise. The other part of the story is we are dependent on a lot of countries to import these things. A lot of these products are made in China, made in other countries, so we are dependent on that as well. Again, it's not that easy that overnight we will make a factory in India. For example, and I'm sure all of you would have also noticed, remember when the COVID-19 crisis happened, supply chain got disrupted, and in the entire world there was shortage of semiconductor chips, mobile phones, laptops, electric cars, normal cars also, there was a shortage of that. People who were going to buy a car, they had a waiting of 2 years, 3 years, because the supply chain was affected. China was not producing the number of semiconductor chips that were required. And if you remember, there was a demand that India should have semiconductor factory. India should make its own semiconductor chips. Remember, that was a demand. The problem is it is very easy to say this. It's not like making lunch or dinner that let's have semiconductor industry. Do you know how much money it requires to set up even one semiconductor factory? It requires billions and billions of dollars. You can't even imagine the money it requires. It's not that easy that you can just think, oh, let us set up this factory also, that factory also, that factory also. Because it requires a lot of things to actually fall into place. So investment is huge. China didn't become China in one single year. China became China because of what they have been doing since 1980s. And now they are at a position where they can claim monopoly in manufacturing sector around the world. But it can't happen overnight. It's not like cooking dinner or cooking food. It's not like you tell your mom, I'm hungry, and mom makes something in 5 minutes. That is not what happens. It actually requires a lot of things and a lot of policies need to change. In India, if the government now wants to make a dam, for making a dam, the government takes 5-10 years just to acquire land. Just imagine that. People don't give away their land and they have their own reasons. So setting up such a huge factory, do you think people will give away their land, you can get up your infrastructure money? All of that is a big, big, big headache. Similarly, there are other issues as well that we have to contend with. As I told you, climate change has also induced an energy crisis in India. The energy cost is going up. More and more people are using more and more machines. All of that has actually been a very, very big problem. Now, I see a question being repeated in the chat time and time again. Don't worry, I'll see all your comments. I'll just take that question. A lot of you are asking me the meaning of viability gap funding. Viability gap funding, right? So what is viability gap funding? Let me tell you. So basically viability gap funding is a simple idea. Government says, we know that setting up a factory will be very costly. Let's say setting up a semiconductor factory would require $10 billion, although the real cost is much more than this also. Let's assume government says you want $7 or $10 billion set up a factory. And government says, we know you will not have that much money. So don't worry. You arrange some money. Let's say you are able to arrange $5 or $6 billion. Rest of the gap, we will try to fill that. Now, how will they try to fill that? There are different options. Either the government will say, okay, we'll give you half of the money and half of the company we will own. Or let's say government says, we'll give you half of the money and then take it as a loan, you can give it back. These are different kind of things that will happen. Or government will say, okay, you arrange $5 billion, don't pay us bill, we'll give you land for free. That is contribution from my side. That is called viability gap funding, meaning that to make the project viable, viable means practical or successful. To make the project viable, whatever is the gap, we will fund it. So that is viability gap funding. That can be in terms of money, in terms of infrastructure, permissions, land, whatever. Government says, don't worry, you go ahead, we will give you whatever you require, whatever the gap is. We will fill in the gap. Okay? Now, also, and I tell this every single time, announcements on paper in India are very different from announcements when they translate in real life. So a lot of things that we actually are studying are mostly the announcements that are made on paper. How they translate into real life, that remains to be seen. Okay. Anyway, let's go ahead. The next news that we have is the government of India is saying they will use the G20 meeting to showcase their rural and archaeological tourism. If you see, there is a trend that is happening in India in the past 2 years or so. The trend is the government of India focusing on some topics time and time again. If you see that trend, what are those topics? You can also see one topic where government of India has been focusing a lot on is tourism. Recently, for example, the Prime Minister in fact said that when you travel anywhere in the country, please spend 5% of your expense on buying local made things. You heard that? Prime Minister himself suggested, whenever you travel anywhere in the country, let's say you spend 10,000 rupees, 5% of that, please make sure that you spend helping buying something that are made locally. So tourism again is a thing that the government of India is repeating time and time again. That gives you a hint of important topics because the government has been focusing so much on different types of tourism. Because the government has realized the importance of this sector, how many jobs can it generate, how much money it can generate for the government. So government is using the G20 summit for that. I told you earlier as well, G20 summit is not just one meeting. The real meeting will happen at the end of the year, but before that also there are hundreds of meetings that are held where the leaders of the countries don't come, but some representatives from different countries come. So some meetings will be held in Udaipur, some in Varanasi, some in other parts of the country. So what the government of India has planned is all those meetings will be held in different parts of the country so that we can actually highlight how there are different destinations in India where people can visit. So government of India is looking to highlight certain villages in these G20 summit. For example, the Latpura Khas village in Madhya Pradesh, the Khonoma village in Nagaland, Dholavira, all these will be highlighted so that we can attract more and more tourists. Now, I don't think you need to remember the names of these villages as such because these will be highlighted time and time again. But yes, do remember about the heritage sites, etc. that the government of India is focusing on. Now, there are different types of tourisms that we have. Normal tourism where you go to Paris, you see the Eiffel Tower, you go to London, you go to Switzerland, different places. However, then there are other kind of things as well that you actually involve in tourism. For example, I'll give an example of India. In India, we have different types of tourism. There's rural tourism. Rural tourism means when you have villages and you have actually made certain changes in villages where you can actually go and see a lot of new things. I'll give you an example, okay? I'll give you a personal example. I don't know how many are you from Rajasthan. If you are from Rajasthan, you might know a place. If you're not from Rajasthan, visit a place called Tilonia. Tilonia. There's a place in Rajasthan called Tilonia. This is near Ajmer. So basically by train you go till Ajmer, and then from Ajmer you take a bus or cab, whatever, and you go to Tilonia. So Tilonia is actually a village in Rajasthan. Now it is a place in Rajasthan, it's a village actually. It has been adopted by an NGO, and it's an amazing village where you see ladies, gents, not even educated, they can make solar panels, they can make solar cookers, they can make every kind of appliance that you want for your solar energy requirements. They have their own small hospital kind of a thing which these people themselves run. They have many manufacturing capacities. No education, but they have been trained in all of this. So many people come to this village just to learn what is actually happening. In fact, the government of India actually brings in very, very old women from African countries to Tilonia every year for training. Just search for that. So basically when you see the government of India to improve our relationship with African nations, some very poor African nations, from those nations some people come, usually women in their 40s, 50s, in their 60s also. They come there where Indian women are training these African women. Both of them know no common language. Their language, they can't speak, their language, they can't understand, but they're just communicating how to make solar panel, how to make solar lamps, etc. So, for example, these are the villages in Africa where you don't have any electricity, but they have a lot of sunlight. So they can use it by the knowledge given by Indian village women. So all of that is an example of what rural tourism can do. And because there's so many tourists that actually come in, now there is also a place to stay in Tilonia, no hotel or nothing, but they do have a kind of a place where you can stay for 1 or 2 nights without any issue. Do try and visit this place, it's a very good experience. But this is just one example of what rural tourism can do. India has also become a major destination for medical tourism. Medical tourism is, India is famous for having great healthcare infrastructure at an affordable price. So people from developing nations especially come to India in large numbers to get their treatment done. You don't realize something, because in India, the tendency is just to be pessimistic about our country. But I'll tell you some good points about our country also that you can feel proud. One good point was Tilonia. I'll tell you one more good point about India today. The other good point is healthcare in India, despite all its problems, is still very, very, very affordable. You go to developed nations, one single visit to a very ordinary doctor can cost you thousands and thousands of rupees, and you can't even imagine this. If you fall ill in, let's say, US and you don't have an insurance, just the ambulance coming to you and taking you to the hospital can cost you the entire savings of your lifetime. Do you know that? That is the amount of expenditure that you can have in normal healthcare problems in other countries, which is not usually the case in India in most of the situations. That is why medical tourism also has become extremely important. Chennai has become the hub of it. Delhi also now has many hospitals that mostly cater to these people who come in from developing countries, get their treatment at a good cost, and then they can go ahead. So all these are something that Indian government has been focusing on beach tourism, cultural tourism, etc. A lot of places which were earlier not explored. You go to northeast part of India, you go to Odisha, for example. All these places are now turning into cultural hubs. I'll give you one more example, a personal example again. If you're from Odisha, you would know. If you're not from Odisha, try and visit the Konark temple. The Konark temple, which is near Puri. Again, a great temple, a great landmark. Earlier also was visited by many people. Now the government has realized its potential. So now they have a festival which is around the Konark temple, where they set up tents, etc., where they even have many functions where people come in and they spend money and they collaborate with the common community. So all of that is an example of the government realizing the importance of tourism. And that is actually helping local people get more and more money. Indian government has been giving a push to rural tourism in the policy as well. For example, Ministry of Tourism has designated rural tourism as a niche sector in the tourism industry. The ministry has even developed draft national strategy and roadmap for rural tourism to promote local products, give them access to technology, give them more capacity building so that we can actually attract people from all around the world to these places. This is what brings me to the end of the session. I hope by the end of it, you're feeling even prouder of the country if that was possible by taking all these good examples. Make sure that you understand and remember there are a lot of great things going on right in our country. There are some bad things, there are some things that you need to improve on. But again, at the end of the day, if you do decide and try to look at the good side of the story, there are very, very amazing things happening in the country. You just need to look towards that. So this brings me to the end of the session. These are a couple of practice questions that I have for you as always. Try and write an answer. Try and make sure that you try and write these answers in 250 words. You can utilize the student portal as well. Make sure you give feedback to each other's answer and do attend the quiz based on these topics on a Telegram channel. Go there right away as soon as the session ends and do hit the subscribe button if you have not done so till now. I'll see you tomorrow. Once again, 10 a.m. sharp. Be here. Thank you so much. Have a good day ahead. Jai Hind.